Hey, this is Keith with How to Build Your Own Home. I want to talk about flat work. I've been doing a lot of big flat work jobs here lately. Flat work is typically your condenser pads, your porch, your stoop, your driveway, patios, that kind of thing. I'm doing a lot of concrete on this job. I want to go over a couple of things that I want to make sure that I take care of before we even pour the concrete, because sometimes you can't do the things that you need to do later on once the concrete's poured. Couple things that I always do is I do put rebar on my drives. Now, a lot of contractors won't do that. They said it's an unnecessary expense, but I've got collapsible soils on here on this job. As you've seen when we first did the excavation on this job, we had to dig down 8 feet, and because we have collapsible soil. So I didn't want to take any risk. So we do have rebar on this job. Now I want to show you something. I want to make sure that whenever I do a flat work job and I'm butting up to the garage or I'm butting up to the house, that I actually dial that rebar into the foundation, right into the garage. That way, if there's any lift or any settling, whatever, it's not going to affect the concrete. Too often you'll see concrete that will lift in one section and settle in another section, and you'll see that go several inches. Well, we can really ameliorate that by putting rebar in there. It will stop that flex that often happens with concrete. You'll see some finish work here of flat work. I've got a phenomenal flat work guy. His name's Javier. That's his truck up there. He's getting ready to leave right now. He's unloading some rebar. It's phenomenal flat work guy. And you can see his finished work here. This here's the patio we did on the back side of this house. And you'll see it's kind of like a white and gray in areas. That's because we just saw cut this concrete. Now I want to go over different control cracks. It's really what they are. There's 2 different kinds. There's a saw crack, the saw cut, which is what you see here. And this needs to be cut 3/4 inch into the concrete. That way, if it cracks, you control where that crack is going to take place. In the garage here, my other concrete contractor that I hired, he did a tool joint. Now, tool joint, it's more pronounced, and they do it at the time of the pour. I am not a fan of tool joint. This is why he's not doing my flat work. I asked him to do saw cut, and I came back and he had tool joints in here, which is fine. But tool joints, it's a wider V, and if there is any settling or if there is any cracking, it actually makes it more pronounced. So I'm not a fan of tool joints, which is kind of a V-like trowel as they push it through the concrete. When it's wet, there's creating that tool joint. I'm not a fan of that. I like a saw cut, making sure that it's at least 3/4 inch cut into the concrete, and you see that right here. That there is your saw cut, and you want to make sure that you go down 3/4 inch and it be continuous. You don't want to have a concrete subcontractor do that by hand and they're trying to cut it and it's up and down and up and down. You want that saw cut to be continuous, 3/4 inch at the very least, all the way through the concrete. That way, when it does crack, for the most part, you're controlling it where you want it to happen. And that's what a saw cut is. Also, I am not a fan of steps. I hate steps. I don't like steps. So in my neck of the woods where we build, we do a lot of 0 thresholds. Now that's a subtle ramp right there for the door exiting the home and entering the home. I did that on all the doors. So I have no 2 or 3 inch, no step at all. You see the same over here. Those steps going into those doors, there's 0 steps there. And I have about a 2 or a 3 inch ramp, subtle ramp, and my concrete guys are really, really good at that. So that if you wash off things or you blow things off, you're not going to get water into the house or even into the garage. So this was all poured by 3 guys. This is about 3 yards, a little over 3 yards. They did a phenomenal job. Again, we got the concrete here, rebar dialed in, so we have a complete lock throughout the whole flat work. Now, a couple of other things. I went over this with my concrete subcontractor. We're going to do something kind of unique on this. You know how I have such a long drive? I was really worried about that. Am I going to be able to sheet water off efficiently? Now, in another post I did, I showed you where I put in a drain, and this is going to capture all the water off of the roof, and it's going to come right down here into the drain. That does go underneath the flatwork here. I'm going to trip over something. But still, I'm going to have a lot of water throughout this entire area. We're talking 2,000 to 3,000 square feet of water sheeting off this. So we're going to have a low point right here, right where this string is. And as we put down the mud, we're going to actually create a V, a subtle trough, a subtle V, so that the water, as it comes down, we actually enlarged the driveway about a foot, so that we're going to actually create a V, so the water actually has a way to go, and it's going to go out to the street. Always thinking about water and where it's going to go. A lot of flat work guys, sometimes they don't think about that. The really, really good ones do. You want to think in advance of that. A couple of other things. I've got right here, this here on the side of the house is going to be a planter box along the entire length of the house here, planter box. Now you've got to think, if I pour concrete, how am I going to get water to that? Well, we've already dug down, and you can see where they disturbed the soil right through here, and they got a conduit running right underneath there. It's about a 2-inch pipe, so I can easily fit water down there. I did the same thing over here. You can see where they put it. This is actually a 3-inch pipe, and it's right there. We got a 3-inch pipe, so I can easily fit water, maybe 2 or 3 lines of water, even some electrical underneath that, all the way across. You can kind of see where it was disturbed, and it punches out on the other side. That way, later on, when we do some landscaping, they've got an easy situation. I just feed things in right underneath it. I've seen landscapers not have that, and they take a water hose, they shove it underneath there, disturb all that soil, weaken the patio or the porch or whatever it may be, just to feed their lines on there, and then eventually that thing caves in, or you got some serious cracking in the foundation. So something you want to watch for. Again, a lot of subcontractors may not recommend rebar. I do. Look at your soils test, talk to your geotech engineer, ask them what their recommendations are. Given how long this is, and given how collapsible the soils are, we really compacted this really well. I made sure all my subcontractors during the winter they parked in here, and we really compacted it. I even put the dumpster way back there, so when the dumpster came, they were compacting it at the same time. So I think weird like that. I think about, where can I have the most traffic and make sure that the soil is really, really compacted. The only area that was weak in that is when they trenched out for the drain line to capture the roof over there, capturing all that water, draining it underneath there. It was a little weak underneath there, so we really rolled it really, really well. Make sure that's really well compacted. We've had a lot of rain. This is the driest day we've had in well over a month and a half. So we're getting ready to pour this on next week. A couple of other things I want to talk to you about. Now, this here's what's called an approach. Now, a lot of jurisdictions, permitting offices, they will want an approach inspection before you can pour this section. Typically from the lip of curb is typically from right down to here, 4 feet or 5 feet out, depending upon your jurisdiction. That is an easement. That is typically your city or county maintained easement. They're going to want to inspect that. I've talked about this on one other post about several months ago, before you pour, and you're going to want to know their specifications. Typically it could be 3 to 6 to 12 inches of road base compacted, then rebar set in there, and then they come and inspect it before you can pour. The reason being is because garbage trucks typically drive, and they can use these curbs a lot of the time to make their turnabouts, and if it's not properly reinforced to handle their weight and they crack it, then you've got some problems. So stop to the point where the approach is, and then make sure you have an approach inspection. Just check your city offices or your county offices and ask them if they need to have an approach. I know a lot of builders, they don't do that. They just pour it, and then the inspector comes and they think it was already done and it was always there, and it wasn't. But if you have a real stickler building department, make sure you follow that process. We are thinking about doing a circle drive right in through here. This here is the original bid amount, and my client really wants to have a circle drive to go all the way around that way. So I'm waiting for that estimate. If he approves that, we are going to use the form as it is. If not, we have to change these forms just a little bit, but we've accommodated these forms to actually fit that circle drive that would come all the way over here and dump out, about 50 feet that way. So wait to see how that works out. Also on condenser pads, I always make sure my subcontractor for concrete pours my condenser pads, and that I dial those in with rebar into the foundation. Now, a lot of HVAC contractors will say, well, I've got a plastic one I can put down, I can get it done if you want it. I always say, no, we're going to put it on concrete. We're going to dial it into the house, and you can see where my condenser pad's going to be way down this way. I've seen condenser pads just like tombstones in the cemetery. They start to settle. You want all that dialed in with rebar. We're going to have a 3-foot walk all the way down. We're going to expand it to 5 feet where the condenser pad's going to be. They're going to reduce it back down to 3 feet when we continue on past that way. So a couple of things with flat work, a lot of things to consider. I am a real fan of skirting the home with concrete. At least a 2-foot skirt or even a 3-foot skirt. This house will be skirted about 85% of the house will be skirted. The benefit of that is if you have sprinklers, they're 2-3 feet away, they're not going to spray on the home. How many times have you driven through neighborhoods and you see sprinklers just put all kinds of garbage up against the stucco or the siding, and it just looks terrible. I like to keep my landscaping away from the home, drainage away from the home. So we may end up coming back and doing some skirting over here in some other sections of the house. But getting ready to pour this one out. This here is an Omni block home with an aluminum shingle roof. As I mentioned before, it's kind of a rambler look. Just a gorgeous home inside. We'll probably wrap this up in about a week or two, and we'll give you some video on the inside. This is Keith Kelch talking to you about flat work. I hope I covered a lot for you, helped you out. If you have any questions, please post them down below. I respond to those. Even if there's 10 or 20 a day, I make sure I try to respond to those. Anyway, I'm going to get home. I'm kind of hungry, and my voice is kind of scratchy today. You guys take care. Bye-bye.